Convene our October 6th joint meeting with the school board and continue with our work session on the Ladysmith service area sewer collection system. We have Mr. Black with us representing Western Carolina, Mr. Underwood representing Reedy Church, Mrs. Long representing Port Royal. I'm Floyd Thomas, the vice chair, representing Mattapanai. Mr. Forehand will be late today, and Mr. Seeley is absent, so we will go ahead and get started. Mr. Schiebel, I believe you're going to give us some more information.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Tonight's work session is to essentially discuss the Ladysmith sewer service area and the upgrades to the pump station, and talking about what we've been calling the Polkrak Creek Interceptor. The Polkrak Creek Interceptor has been in the CIP for about 14 years. Our last master plan that was done prior to that identified that, done by R. Stuart Royer, and again that was reconfirmed recently when we presented our wastewater master plan to the board sometime at the end of last year. So Dewberry and Davis is our water and wastewater master plan engineers. They're the ones who were at your last meeting and presented the particular findings that you found. So a couple things to note, that they said we had zero capacity left in the South River pump station. That is based on a model. So if you actually look at what we are, that's worst case scenario. That means everything's been flushed at the same time hitting our pump station, and they used a 3.8 peak factor. Typically you would use a 2.5, is what we normally use by VDH standards for the Virginia Department of Health. So they're still within the engineering guidelines. At 3.8, it just makes things look a lot worse than it is. And that's saying that we have one pump running. So we do have a second pump, which is designed as the backup pump, and you could have some storage in your line. So we've got additional capacity that we could actually have to be able to support additional growth while we're working on trying to do that. That doesn't mean we can delay anything that needs to be done. So when we selected our engineering firms, we actually have 3 different groups that work for us. So we've got one that's Draper, Aiden, Hazen, and Sawyer as a team that's working on the Rappahannock River permitting, and they specialized in that, and that's what their contract is. We have one with Dewberry and that is strictly for water and sewer master planning. And then we have one with WW and Associates, and their contract is to do all of our conveyance of water, wastewater design work. So I've got Mr. Herb White here, and he's got a small presentation that I've laid in front of you in front of your desk that he's going to kind of walk through each one of those scenarios and where we're at. And he's going to kind of reconfirm some of those flow numbers with you, as well as he spent quite a bit of time trying to get a good breakdown to actually provide you with good numbers for construction cost. They've recently completed a sewer line, a gravity sewer line, and they were able to extrapolate numbers out of that to be able to give us more realistic numbers. And we were able to take the 25% contingencies and actually bring them down to a 5% contingency for a project this size. Makes a lot more sense. So with that, I'm going to have him come up and
Mr. Schiebel, before he comes, Mr. Underwood has a question.
Yes, sir. .5 is the peak factor that VDH has as the standard. 3.8. Yes, sir.
But I think what you're saying is they prefer to look at worst case scenario.
They did. That's what they presented to the board. For master planning aspect, they were looking at worst case scenario. And one of the things that makes a difference too is the timing of when that peak factor is. So right now, if you look at where our pump station is in Ladysmith Village, what's currently built in Ladysmith Village is the closest to the pump station. Anything that's built in Ladysmith Village moving forward gets further away. So your peak time is not going to impact your current peak time. That's going to extrapolate that further back. So the longer it takes to get there. So what we're concerned about is what can I flow at the worst case scenario during that peak. Normally we would use a 2.5. They used a 3.8. Mr. White was able to go through and review and report and come up with that difference of what they were using, which kind of explained why it seemed as bad as it was based on their extrapolation. And then I called them and walked through the report with them again, and that's when they said yes, they did use 3.8 and that was based on flushing all the toilets at one time that they used in their model. So there's no actual flow data that's been taken, what's coming into the facility. They did do a drawdown test. And another anomaly that I noticed in reviewing this with Mr. White was the actual capacity at the pump station was based on a design flow that was different than the actual flow. And that could be as simple as a pump's just worn out and we need to replace a pump. So I think it was unfair to say that the system can only pump 185 gallons per minute when it was designed for 350. That's as simple as spending $10,000 to replace a pump, and you can have a big difference in there. So just by replacing a pump, we can make a difference in that. If that makes sense.
You also mentioned that only one pump was working at the time that they.
It's designed, when you design a pump station, it's designed to
over,
have
right?
a pump and then a backup pump in case
right.
it goes down. So, you know, if we had to run two pumps for a short period of time to be able to keep that flow down, then that could happen. Another thing is timing too. So, you know, you could change your floats so that it pumps at different rates. So instead of it pumping down, you know, at a shorter rate, you end up increasing your pump so you could actually pump it down more. So, you know, you don't want those pumps to run continuously. There needs to be some rest time in there. And those are things that we should be able to play with to give us a little more capacity short term while we're actually designing the upgrade and then putting that in place.
Well, Mr. Chairman, my only concern is, you know, I think we need some. I don't think well, I'll wait till after this presentation, but I'm concerned about the numbers not being accurate enough to make us, giving us data to make a smart decision.
That's what Mr. White's here to present to you tonight. He's our design engineer. He's the one that actually be designing the system and hopefully can explain that.
And I think we'll probably have a few questions once he's done. So,
Absolutely.
Mr. White, if you'd like to come forward.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
I just got a brief summary of the South River Pump Station proposed upgrade as well as the Polkrak Creek Interceptor. As Joey said, the existing capacity of that pump station is estimated to be 180 gallons a minute. It was originally designed to be 350. This project was to demolish the existing pumps that are in that station and put in new pumps that have a capacity of 500 gallons a minute. It's a significant jump from the anticipated 180 that's currently in it. During construction, there would need to be a temporary bypass of the station that would be part of the contractor's work. Also envisioned is an electrical upgrade because of the larger horsepowers associated with the bigger pumps. There would also be communications, electronic communications for pump activities. We've included a cost estimate for both of these projects behind this handout. We estimate the project cost for this project to be about $600,000. That's total project cost. We believe that for design and permitting that can be done by March of 21, and the construction could be completed by October 21, which is basically 12 months from now. Going to the Polkrak Creek Interceptor, that route would run for phase one would run from I-95 in Ladysmith to the wastewater treatment plant. It's approximately 5 miles of 30-inch interceptor. This requires environmental permitting as well as easement acquisition because it's a new line going down Polkrak Creek. Our estimated cost for this project is $12 million, which is significantly below that planning document. We base that on not only the last project that we did that was similar to this project, but we also got quotes on the pipe material itself to confirm the cost of those materials. Feel pretty solid that that's a good planning number. As far as design and permitting, we believe that project could be done in a year, and construction about a year and a half. So this project could be brought online as early as April of 2023.
That's the earliest?
I mean, it could be fast-tracked a little bit earlier, but let's say December 2022 would be probably the earliest.
Okay, so we're looking at 18 to 24 months in either case. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
That's all that I had to summarize these two projects. If you want to go back and talk numbers or whatever y'all would like to ask, I'd be available to answer those questions.
Why don't you stay right there for 1 second, because
Okay.
I've got a question I'm sure the rest of the board does. I wasn't clear during the original presentation we had, if we invest in the South River pump station at 600,000, is that investment basically wasted by doing the $12 million project, or do we have to do both?
Got to do both.
Okay, that one has nothing to do with the other. If we decide right now to do $12 million project, we're still going to have to go back and do something for South River
Correct.
because of time or because of capacity?
South River pumps into that new interceptor.
Okay.
Right, in Pendleton.
Okay, that's one thing I want to make clear. Mr. Black, you don't have any questions at all? Mr. Underwood? Long? Okay. I'm sure we got you here at a great expense, so I can't let you go that quick.
That's no problem.
I know. The 600,000 we have to do immediately. Let's go back to Mr. Thank you. The question we had before, 2.5 versus 3.8 is in terms of flow. So our capacity right now, with the numbers Mr. Schiebel gave you, would be what for South River?
It's currently pumping at 180 gallons a minute.
And the capacity is really 350, but we'd have to exchange a pump for that.
Correct.
And the pump would cost how much? Just the pump?
One second. Pumps with markup and all the costs associated with that, 100,000 for the pumps themselves.
Clarifying, that's to go from the current pump.
From 180 to 350.
Right, to a larger pump. To go to 350, what the pump should be doing.
Right.
That's what I thought you would ask. So to bring it back up to the standard now would just be replacing the current,
Gotcha.
just the T4.
Gotcha.
So each pump's around 10 grand, so 20.
Probably 25,000, somewhere in there. Just to, if all you wanted to do is replace the internals of the pump to get it back to where it should be, it'd be about a $25,000.
Okay, now the
Number.
overall project, because this is going to flow into Polkrak Creek.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
If we just did the pump, is that a viable solution in your opinion? Because we're going to send a lot more to South River.
I would call
to
it.
Polkrak Creek.
I would call the current pump station, even with that upgrade, at or near capacity. It's very close to capacity.
Okay, so
It doesn't have excess capacity.
So you're at least saying go to 600,000
Yes, sir.
to make sure we've got capacity there.
Mm-hmm.
What's our building look like in that area? Since I know Pendleton's expanding, I just saw that last week. Mr. Cully's going to come behind you if he may.
I just asked Mr. Fincham. So with Maple Grove, 74 homes, and somebody's looking to do a second phase in Ladysmith Village, another 250 homes. So you've got potential for 350 more lots that's got to go into South River Pump Station. So just to put a pump in and not upgrade it, you're going to be back with these things moving forward, and you got the realtor information today about how things are selling.
Yeah.
And the other issue for the VDOT pump station, which is what the Interceptor replaces, Pendleton's looking at another 700, platting another 800 lots. And that goes in the Pendleton pump station, but that goes to VDOT, and that'll completely overload VDOT. So that's why it's two separate things that you're looking at.
Okay.
So with what is being planned by the developers in already approved subdivisions, you're going to exceed the capacity at South River pretty quick, and you're going to definitely overload VDOT.
Okay.
Did I explain that correctly? That's correct.
All right. Mrs. Long asked which one is addressing VDOT.
So VDOT is the Interceptor. So we would be completely removing the VDOT pump station. So the estimate to upgrade that was 1.7, I believe. And unfortunately, that becomes throwaway money fairly quickly because there's not enough capacity even by upgrading that to make it a significant impact. So within 10 years, you'll probably be having to upgrade that again and putting that Interceptor in. So it didn't make any sense to spend that additional money to upgrade that pump station for the short term. You're better off to go ahead and bite that bullet and get the long term done so that we can handle all of the development in Ladysmith Village and Pendleton at one time. So South River would pump into the VDOT, what we call the VDOT pump station now. That would become the Interceptor line. Pendleton, through their development, they've already got to upgrade that as part of their proffers of upgrading that pump station. So there's currently 2 existing lines. One of them's used, one of them's not. That'll be upgraded underneath of the developer's cost to do that. So Pendleton will both be done. And then at some point, we're going to have to pick up from the beginning of the Interceptor and then bring that up to up 95 to actually be able to meet where Pendleton comes into that. So that'll be as we continue the development and push further, then that Interceptor is going to have to move further up the line and increase that line size further down the road. So by doing the 500-gallon capacity, it'll put us about 640 connections that would be able to come into South River, and that will allow us just over 1,100 connections into VDOT, which would include anything to pick up Pendleton or any of those other developments. And not only do we have the residential development, we've got Sheets that's coming, we've got Tractor Supply, and anything else that's in the loop that we've also hasn't been, their capacity has not been calculated.
So I'm sorry, Reggie, you had a question? Those 640 connections that we're discussing are purely residential. You're not counting Sheets.
That's 640 ERCs, equivalent residential connections. So whatever we get, that's what it would be for that size of a facility.
Now, the question we had on a lot of things we've done before is those 640 connections are going to pay, is it $10,000 to connect to water and sewer, or $8,000?
It's $6,000 for wastewater.
Okay.
One other point I wanted to make when we talk about the Interceptor line, everything at South River and everything at Pendleton currently goes to Carmel Church, where we also don't have any capacity in that gravity line. So that's the other benefit of the $12 million line. We can't keep putting all the waste in Carmel Church, or we have no ability to expand anything on any of the industrial property or the properties we have there.
So Mr. Shebel, based on the 2 projects, South River and the Polkrak Creek Interceptor, in terms of longevity, what does that look like 10 years down the road?
Well, the Polkrak Creek Interceptor gives you an extra 8,400 ERCs. So
8,400?
8,400. So that gives you a 30-year project.
Oh,
So that really incorporates, you're spending that kind of money. That really makes a lot of sense to be able to pick up that capacity that's already approved in the Carmel Church or in the Ladysmith area.
Right.
So that would pick up all that flow. The pump station, again, you're limited to 641 ERCs, and then that would have to be upgraded again. At that point, you would completely upgrade that pump station and the force main to be able to flow additional flow through there. And at that point, you're really going to have to start looking at the rest of the trunk sewer line coming from Ladysmith down to the future Polkrak Creek Interceptor.
So based on the 640 connections, if we looked at a time frame that we could develop those 640, what type of time frame would we be looking at before we'd have to go back and upgrade again should, we reach that capacity?
Depends on whose crystal ball you're looking at.
I'm gonna look at yours right now.
So,
You got his and Mike's at the same time.
as I look at, if I go back and look at our connection history over the past 14 years, I would say we're going to average 65. But underneath the current climate that we're in, if we continue in this market, there's a developer behind us now that's in the audience that's looking at possibly expanding the Ladysmith Village and moving forward with that project fast. So if they get in there and start selling homes, they're going to want their sewer capacity fast. So they're in the market to sell homes, and they sell them fast. They're the #1 home builder in the United States. So if that happens, it's important that we move forward for that capacity.
And I think, Mr. Shebel, thank you, and I think that's what we always have to look at when we talk about our Ladysmith Road project is we have to build infrastructure in order to grow.
Yes, sir.
And so we have to take the pain up front, which sometimes means that we may have to increase taxes in order to fund the projects necessary to get to where we are 10 years or 20 years down the road. So people have to remember that the infrastructure has to be here in order for people to want to build and to come to Carolina. So I thank you, Mr. Chief.
Yes, sir.
I think this is one case. What was the second phase? Mr. Cully mentioned the second phase at Ladysmith Village. What's the number of units for the second phase? Do we know?
There's a total of about 2,200 units that could be built, 2,200 to 2,300. I believe they're looking at somewhere between 1,700 and 1,800 is what kind of the number they're looking at. But worst case is they could do, I believe it's 2,200.
All right, Mr. Fincham's coming to give us an idea.
The original Ladysmith Village was 2,850. There was another 320 for South River, which was then incorporated into Ladysmith Village. So the total approved number of units at Ladysmith Village, including South River, is just under 3,200 units. The developer, as I understand, or the prospective developer, as I understand it, is not looking to maximize that density.
Right.
There was some multifamily with that. There was also some town. So don't want to speak for a developer and divulge too much information, but as I understand it, they're not looking at that full density, but you would still be looking at an ultimate build out potentially of 25 to 2,600 units, all said and done, including what's there now.
But they have a phased approach limitation also, right? Is it 50 a year or something like that?
No, it's not that small. They have a phased approach. They are approaching the end of that 15-year time limit for the phasing plan. Even so, reality says that there's going to be, in effect, a phasing plan based upon the construction and the sale of the houses.
But no Forest County phasing plan.
No, they're almost at the end of what
Okay.
was approved by the board.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
that's correct.
So they can basically, if they had 2,000 people lined up to buy houses, they could basically build 2,000 houses in a year and sell those houses and be gone.
We're getting close.
Realistically, that's not going to happen, but
We're getting close to that
possibility.
possibility.
Okay.
I did not look at the exact expiration date of the phasing plan, so, but
Okay.
we're getting close.
All right, and I'm asking that only because, as we said, sometimes we make investments for things that are going to come.
Mhm.
It appears at $600,000, all we need is 100 connections to pay off that particular expansion, right? $6,000 times 100 is 6 million. I mean 600,000. Does that sound right? Okay. Mr. Shebel, does that sound?
That's, yeah.
I mean, that's a really important thing. I just did the full
Yeah,
math
that's 3.8 million.
at 640 connections.
Right, correct.
Yeah, that's the math that I did first.
Yes, sir.
But we're going to invest 600,000 right away. So we're saying if we get 100 connections in the next year or so, we basically can pay for that project.
Correct, except technically that money's being used to offset the debt service for the wastewater treatment plant construction.
Well, I mean, it all goes together.
It goes together,
But-
yes, sir.
Jeez, can't
But-
count twice.
But
yeah.
no. My thing is, this particular project, we
Correct.
can
It would
basically
increase
say
the
it
pay
pays for
that.
itself.
Correct.
Then the other 3.2 million, which would be left over from the 600,000, will go to pay debt service for the wastewater treatment. This one works very good mathematically, financially. Can you give me the same thing for Polkrak Creek? Or are the other 2,000 houses from Ladysmith Village going to go to Polkrak Creek instead.
Everything goes to the Polkrak Creek. Everything in
So,
Ladysmith
okay.
and Pendleton all go to Polkrak Creek.
So I'm eventually gonna do that when he gets to house number 1,000 or whatever.
Well, we got about a 2.5 year lead time to do that project from the time we say go,
Right,
providing that we don't have any issues with permitting and property acquisition. So that included that. So there's 2.5 years in there. So we've got to be able to get that project designed and have that ready to bid so that we know that we're ready to move with that project.
okay. Now, Mr. Cully, do you recall the debt service numbers that we got for this project before? Or what's the debt service on $12 million? Is it 30-year, I guess?
I have not looked at that yet, but we didn't budget for the Interceptor in this year's budget, but we have budgeted for part of the South River Pump Station, 350,000
I think you're short 150 or something from.
or something. So we're short a little bit of the, but I've got that debt service already built into the current 21 budget. So we borrow the 600,000. We won't have, well, depending on how long we borrow it for too. So we could probably make the debt service work out. But I've already had that figured. But I can get you the 12 million. You know, I get Courtney to run those numbers, and that's one of those things. A 30-year project you can finance at a fairly long time.
Right, and that's what I was thinking, because again, if we have, and this is one where we're gonna have to look at X number of connections per year equals how much money per year to pay the debt service there and to give the other
And like I said,
debt
it's such a vast project because it also gives you capacity in Carmel Church you won't have.
Right,
So then there's business connections and things that happen down there by removing that force main from BDOT into Carmel Church. Suddenly, how much of that? How many connections do we free up for that? Yeah, so suddenly you got 1,200 more connections in Carmel Church you don't have today by putting the Interceptor in. Much less if you got Pendleton with 3,500 homes that are going to ultimately go down that, along with all of Ladysmith Village and everything else that goes on. So way I see it, it's a two-pronged approach for connections by getting that new Interceptor in.
now, Mr. Shebel, a
So
couple of.
just
Go
real
ahead.
quick, 4% interest for 30 years and using a simple loan calculator is 687,000. Yeah, we can do better than 4 right now. So
680,000 is a
That's at
rough
4%.
guesstimate of what
per year.
the $12
For
million
30 years.
loan would cost for 30 years.
Yes, sir.
Which fuzzy math again, 100 and some connections, we could pay for that a year. But that's where we always are, because we plan now and say, okay, we're going to do 100 connections every year, and then after year 2, we drop to 12. Yeah, that's the crystal ball nobody really knows, and it's a balancing act of how far ahead do we put the infrastructure based on where the need is. So, you had a question, Mr. Black?
Yeah, Mr. Shebel, going back to the South River one for a second, when that reaches capacity, you had kind of alluded to it. I mean, so even when we upgrade to the 500 gallons, when that part reaches its life expectancy, what needs to be done there?
So we've got different capacities. We would, in the report that Davenport put out there, there were three separate phases. The first one would be upgrading it to 500 gallons per minute. The next one would be upgrading it to 1,200 gallons per minute. And then the third capacity of putting it at 2,300 gallons per minute. So it's in a 3-stage
So
phase
do we know
approach.
estimated cost there as far as to upgrade from the, I mean, I know it might not be for a while, but do you have any idea? I mean, to go from the 500 to the 1,200?
Let me look here in the report and see what they had for their number.
You guys are fuzzy math. Some serious fuzzy math. Yeah, there's other expenses though. You're not just paying for this. For just this project. Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say. You've got to include other things that the county needs. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah.
While he looks for that, Mr. Fincham, Maple Grove, that's the 55 and over project? Okay. So that's the project that's been approved, actually doing construction now. So there's 74 connections we're guaranteed. Okay.
So I've got 2.4 million, 2.42.
So, Mr. Sheba, let me ask you this question, because we were talking about crystal balls earlier. As far as, so we upgrade, and I understand we have to pay the 600,000. I'm not assuming that, but in a worst case scenario, how quickly would we run out of that capacity? At worst case scenario, going from the 180 to the 500, how quickly? I mean, if and I understand, Mr.
350 to 500.
Well, 350 to 500, yeah.
If we look back to when we were at the peak, I mean, we were putting in, for 2 years, we put just right at 300 homes in a year. So, and that's when we were at the peak. So Belmont had just started up. Ladysmith Village was cranking. So, you know, we were putting in like 280 a year for 2 years in a row, and then the bottom kind of dropped out of
Sure.
it. So that was mid 2000s, early 2000s, I guess, when we did that, and then the number started coming down from that point. So I mean, if you're building 250 homes a year, you know, you're going to eat that capacity up in 2 or 3 years, not including commercial development in
And
an
then
area.
you'd have to turn around. Then you'd have to turn around and then upgrade it in 2 or 3 years to go from the 500 to the 1200. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So what's the cost again to go to 1,200? Right
In their
away?
report, they were showing 2.4. I would have to have Mr. White, you know, run those numbers, and we can bring those back to you and see if we can get that figured out to upgrade that to 1,200 gallons per minute.
Because I just don't understand why I mean, like, with one, it looks like you're all set, but the other one, it looks like it's a Band-Aid. The $600,000 one looks like it could be potentially just a Band-Aid. I mean, while the other one,
Well, he said originally that was something to free up capacity. And it's up to us to decide whether we want to free up capacity that we can pay for with 100 connections, or whether we want to increase the capacity so much that it would take 200 connections maybe to fill it up.
Mr.
A little bit more. You'll never borrow it as cheap as you can today.
Mr. Cully, can I get your opinion on that? I mean, just looking at it from the perspective of the South River, does it make sense just to go to the 500, or does it make sense to actually go to the 1200?
If you're if you're leaning toward we're in a development boom, I would go to the larger 1200, but that would require the Interceptor because you just don't have the capacity.
Well, that's
to be
what
able
I'm
to
saying.
deal
I mean,
with
I don't
that.
think
so
there's
you'd
any.
finance all of that at one time.
Yes.
The whole
Because
project.
because my concern, and of course the bottom could drop out tomorrow. I mean, it's a gamble. I mean, but so we're not soothsayers there. But my concern is we spend the big money, and then we spend, to me, that the 600,000 is a Band-Aid.
Correct. That's a short-term fix.
Yeah, right. So to me, why don't you just do both of them, and then, because then the 1,200 would get you, even at worst case scenario, you're not going to probably, that would get
Yeah,
you
that
several
would get
more
you-
years.
I would have 10, 15 years.
And the borrowing the money is cheap right now as opposed to down the road. Yeah, and just get.
It may not be that much. Mr. White would have to put a sharp pencil to that 2.2 because that's in the sort of the preliminary engineering report, which is more of a worst case scenario number as well. So as he brought the 17 million down to 12, I would imagine he could bring that number down some, and we could certainly get that for you before you have to make a decision. But as you can see, some of these things are just stuff we're working toward having to do. I mean, we do have development pressure, you know, with the developers now. I mean, they're building that 55+ neighborhood. So I would expect that to continue unless something changes in people's patterns.
Okay, just to, if I can make sure I summarize what you're saying, Mr. Black, you suggest instead of 600,000, we go with the larger 1,200 gallons per minute at 2 point something million, and also do the $12 million Interceptor project, finance both of those now, because A, interest rates are low, but the other side of that is we would be making a tremendous infrastructure investment without any real guarantees that the residential units would come to pay off that investment.
And I see that, but at some point, it's just like anything else. I mean, maybe 10 years, but I mean, it's been 10 years between the booms, but the boom will come again. I mean, it's all cyclical. So and it would be, even if you say, all right, you went into a bust, I mean, down the road, it's going to be worth it just because the fact that you borrowed the money now will be probably cheaper money now than it is in 10 years. So to borrow it.
I mean, I'm not disputing what you're saying. I'm
Right.
just restating,
Yep.
making sure
Yes.
I understand what you're saying.
Yes.
And that's kind of where we are. Mrs. Long, you want to add
Well,
something to
I
that?
just had a question. If we waited and did an upgrade to the 1,200 at a later time, is that just adding 2 more pumps, or is that a whole new thing?
New station.
It's a whole new
But
station.
if we do that project first, the bigger pump station,
Mm-hmm.
we can set it up so that it runs at lower flow rates until the interceptor's installed. So we can put a speed control on it just to slow it down to get to that lower capacity of the existing interceptor until we get the new interceptor built. So it is a good investment to build the bigger pump station because you're going to throw away the 600,000. And as Joey said, 2 to 3 years, I'll say 5 for planning purposes.
Thank you.
And I will say that 2.5 is probably closer to 1.5 to 2, just from the way that planning document was written.
Okay, so now you're making it seem like it's extremely logical that we go with the 1,200 on the South River pump station.
Seems logical to me. If the intent is to move forward with the interceptor, it makes sense to upgrade that pump station so that you do it once instead of twice.
Yeah, I think it would be in the best interest of the citizens of the county to assume that growth will eventually come, especially with all of these approved lots.
Right.
So we would be smarter to make the larger investment on the South River pump station. And then go ahead. Mr. Forehand, you have some questions.
Y'all might have covered this, and I apologize for being tardy. What were the assumptions as far as growth that were worked in to the whole plan? We have a 55 and over, which is 60-some units. We have sheets. We have Tractor Supply. We have a whole corridor of commercial that we feel like is coming.
Yeah,
So-
just recently, just before you walked in, actually talked about, figuring 250 homes a year, with possible new development and possible sale of Ladysmith Village, knowing that we've got Maple Grove and Ladysmith Village includes South River. And if that happened, they're looking at possibly platting 250 lots fairly quickly. We're at the end of that phasing plan here in another year, Mr. Fincham had stated, which means that they can build as fast as they needed to be able to meet that need. So, at 250, Mr. White said 5 years max, and we're out. And that's pushing the pump station to do everything it can, backing up capacity within the line, trying to, give it some storage capacity.
But on the commercial side, Sheets has a lot of traffic.
Yeah, Sheets is probably going to be between 10 and 15 ERCs, equivalent residential connections.
Is that it? Okay.
All right, now, Mr. Sheba, while we're on that point, we've included things like the Harris Teeter project, which has been delayed. We've reserved capacity for them.
It's not necessarily reserved. We haven't reserved capacity for anybody with the exception of Carmel Church Business Park that was done when we were building the wastewater treatment plant in 1993. So that's the only capacity that's been reserved. The board's kind of said, pay as you go.
But we have capacity for that project if it
There
starts
is today,
next
yes,
year.
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, and the other thing, MC Dean is not on sewer, right?
They are now.
They are now.
Yeah, but we've just finished that project, and we're getting ready to accept it sometime towards the latter part of this month.
Okay, their
So
entire complex is on sewer, or just their main building?
The complex.
The entire complex is on
Yes,
sewer.
sir.
So that represents how many ERCs that we hadn't counted on?
Now, that goes straight to the wastewater plant.
Right.
So they have not, that's one of the documents we're waiting for is their fixture count, which would tell me how much flow they could actually use. So
Okay.
we don't really have a good number on that today. So
Alright.
that would go against your 1,000,000 gallons in your wastewater treatment plant
Yeah.
and your trunk sewers.
Yeah, and that has nothing to do, or at least the MC Dean project complex has nothing to do with what we're talking about now.
Yes, sir.
That just affects the wastewater treatment plant capacity.
Correct.
And we're in good shape with capacity there for a while.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other thoughts, concerns, questions? So it seems like what the board is saying, and again, I'm just restating, not making a decision, is that it would be in our best interest to look at the larger capacity pumps for South River and at least find out what that pricing would be if we went to loan for the 2.4 million or a lot less, as Mr. White has said, and then again look at what the financing would be for the Interceptor at 12 million.
Yes, sir.
So maybe that would be 3 different options. What the 600,000 is, we could probably do that from now with funds we've got, counted for. But look at one financing of 2.4, and then one of the 2.4 and the 12, and then maybe the 12 by itself. Does that sound like a plan, Mr. Cully?
I don't know that you need, I guess you could do it that way, that you need to do the 2.4 by itself, because that ultimately won't work unless you do the Interceptor 30-inch main.
What Mr. White said is we could turn down the flow until we did the Interceptor. So we could have the capacity for 1,200.
Now, I guess if you wanted to do that and not spend the 600, do the 600, you could do it that way.
It
but
seems like nobody wanted to do the 600.
Right.
Yeah. It seems like we're looking at, for planning purposes now, spending more than the 600,000 that you've got
Right.
in the budget now
Right.
for the most
If
part.
you're going to go to 1,200, exactly.
Right.
You're going by that. I think my add back to that is you would need to look at the capacity issues you're going to have. Not at South River, you'll solve that problem, but VDOT pump station and Carmel Church are going to be where your problem is as you even ramp up to the theoretical maximums that this new South River is putting out. Even if
Right.
it's turned down, it's going to overload quickly. Plus, Pendleton's going to be upgrading their pump stations and also going into VDOT pump station, all of it trying to flow into Carmel Church. And there's only so much capacity in the gravity line from Carmel Church over, and there's where your whole Harris Teeter and things like that aren't on the rezonings of things we've had in Carmel Church Station that have been going on for industrial buildings. We won't have any capacity for those things. Am I speaking out of turn? And Belmont West, another residential neighborhood down there that we won't have capacity for. So as much as South River is important, I think it's equally important that the 30-inch Interceptor gets built. Not that I want to spend $12 million, I'm not, but I think you're going to jam yourselves up with not only Ladysmith, but the whole Carmel Church area, because you're going to run all the sewer runs through one choke point down there.
Does everybody understand that the issues with the $12 million spending is that we're expecting a great deal of growth to help us pay for that expansion, but if we don't get that expansion, we've got a debt service number that we're going to have to make up some other way. That's the only thing, and I know many people have said things when we expanded the wastewater treatment plant that wasn't a good idea because we didn't have capacity and things of that nature. So I've taken a hit for that already, and it seems like a real good idea right now. So if that's what the board wants to do, to look forward to it, that's what we'll direct Mr. Cully to do.
I think the financing is never going to be as advantageous as what it is right now. It hasn't been in the last 50 years, and probably won't be for the next 50
160 years or something like that. Yeah.
So
And I
No,
think-
we're not, we're just gonna direct staff to get those numbers back if that's what the board wants to do.
And I think,
Mr. Black?
yeah, mathematically, Mr. Chairman, I think we have to tax it accordingly. Like, I don't think we can rely on the project to pay for itself. We have to, we have to make sure whatever the debt services that we have to raise the taxes accordingly. I mean, if we're gonna do the project, we have to be willing to raise the taxes. I mean, it's the future of the county. I mean, we can't rely and say, oh, this is gonna pay for itself. The idea is we're gonna pay for it because it's for the future, and whatever money you get off of it, whatever money you get out of it is bonus.
Okay. Mr. Underwood?
I agree with most of what Mr. Black said, in some form or another. But I do think it's we have to look at the future to make sure that we're in a position. So I think both projects would be prudent and definitely smart on our part to pursue with staff.
No, I would agree and think we should put it on our next agenda with new figures from the county for the increase on the South River Pump Station and for the interconnect.
It appears Mr. Cully talked us into that 12 million, didn't he?
Mr. Thomas, staff will go ahead and move forward with, we've already got the price to be able to put the 30-inch Polkrak Creek Interceptor in, so we know that. We'll
Yes.
work on getting a quote to go ahead and go to the 1,200 gallon per minute at South River. And then we'll get that number to Mr. Cully, and he'll work with Davenport to get us a financing number for our next meeting.
That is perfect. That is perfect. I think that's the best choice the board could make at this point in time, not knowing, again, if there's gonna be a housing boom, if there's gonna be a bust, but we will at least be prepared for the future growth that eventually will happen at some point in time. All right? Thank you, Mr. Shebel, Mr.
Thank
White,
you.
for your time, Mr. Cully and Mr. Fincham for added things. Is there anything else on the agenda there that we'd like to talk about? I think we're finished Ladysmith Sewer, so we can take about a 10-minute break and start our regular meeting. So we will adjourn this meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. Long, second by Mr. Underwood. We adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion carries. We stand adjourned.